The Prime Minister has said the climate wars are over. Well, he's right. He is. The battle for truth in science, for prudence and informed policy, has actually been lost in a string of failed forecasts of spin and hysteria. And the Australian Parliament will be enshrining a minimum 43% reduction in carbon dioxide emissions by 2030. And the legislation for that is going to get through thanks to the Greens and the Green in Orbit name Senator Pocock. Don't despair though, a few damp squibs in the coalition will possibly join them. But understand, it will just be virtue signalling ahead of the national rejoicing that we have saved the planet all by ourselves. It's the first step in our way to creating a verdant, utopian ideal where we all can live in harmony with nature, feasting on bountiful mealworms and crickets, basking in the warm glow of our Teslas. We'll all be so happy that wars will cease. There'll be no more poverty or violence. Black lives will actually matter, and Antifa will keep us safe on the streets. Sounds a bit like a leftist ideal, doesn't it? Now, of course, that's absolute nonsense, but it is what the left want you to think. What I think is that this is a really bad move for our country. Every sentient person knows that whatever we do will make no difference to the climate. It won't prevent floods or bushfires or cyclones. It won't lower the temperature of the planet or stop climate variability. It's just going to make us less competitive as we transition to a carbon neutral economy. Sounds so easy, doesn't it? Transitioning. Seems to be the buzzword for everything nowadays. However, decarbonising an economy is not as easy as changing a couple of pronouns and declaring how you identify. Actually, rebuilding an economy based on green principles entails a heck of a lot of pain and huge cost. Now, the Bank of America estimates a net zero by 2050 transition is going to cost $150 trillion US. And as part of that, we're going to have to mine more minerals, ship more steel in order to build the batteries, the solar panels and the wind turbines of the future. And then, of course, we'll have a brand new industry called green landfill, where they can all be dumped when they reach the end of their useful lives. Sort of like this graveyard in China for electric vehicles. But don't worry, that's all way off into the future. Before then, we will be thriving on cheap renewable energy. After all, it is the cheapest energy available. They keep telling us that it's practically free thanks to the wind and the sun. So why are electricity bills so expensive? Now, speaking of the sun though, the PM told us it's his very own nuclear reactor that is powering Australia, while accusing those who advocate for a nuclear industry in this country as being stuck in the past.
They seem obsessed by nuclear reactors, but are ignoring the biggest nuclear reactor of all. It's up there, the sun. Solar power they're ignoring the future, they're stuck in the past, they're frozen in time while the world warms around them.
They're living in the past. Well, I guess that includes the Finnish Greens party, of course. You see, their party manifesto now states that nuclear is, quote, sustainable energy. Even a group, Fridays for Future, started by troubled teen and climate crank Greta Thunberg, released a statement repudiating her claims about nuclear power. Opposition to nuclear power will complicate and increase the already enormous task of addressing the climate emergency, they wrote. If we want to stop global warming below 1.5 degrees, we need every possible means, including nuclear power, to achieve that goal. Well, strangely, these Finnish Greens are certainly not alone. The bureaucrats at the European Commission now claim that investments in nuclear and gas are green. That's right. They put out a draft text earlier this year that said nuclear plants should be considered sustainable if the host country can ensure they cause no significant harm to the environment, which includes safe disposal of nuclear waste. Who would have thought it? They also said natural gas can also be entitled to the green label for a limited time span, making it easier for natural gas producers to attract private investment, provided certain criteria such as carbon dioxide emission levels of 270 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour generated are met. Well, amazingly, gas is green for a little while. This was backed by the European Union Parliament on July the 6th. Now, maybe this has got you a little confused, because it certainly did confuse me. I mean, after all, we are supposed to be following the settled science. And surely settled science, or any science for that matter, doesn't change from country to country. I mean, if it did, it would make a total mockery of the entire climate change movement and the things that they tell us. And also, aren't the Greens using that settled science as the basis to save the world by insisting that we all adopt their collectivist cause? It's the same mantra all over the world. But somehow nuclear and gas are green in other countries. But why then do the Greens advocate for these forms of power, but the motley crew of zealots assembled in our parliament reject it entirely? Not only nuclear, what about gas? Why is it green in the EU, and yet the Greens party here want a moratorium on any new gas plants? That's one of their signature policies. Then while we're at it, picking on the Greens, why don't they take China, for example, to task over building of coal-fired power stations or building airports in the South China Sea? And aside from the fact that they won't let us put a pylon into our very own ocean without myriad eco and indigenous permits, I actually would have thought creating safe spaces for military planes would constitute an environmental emergency. But they've been strangely silent on that one too. I mean, who needs pesky real wars when you can safely fight a climate war from the comfort of your Senate seat? But let's go back to the PM's declaration that it's all over. I repeat, the truth has been lost in the fog of the climate war, and we are serving up our economic security as tribute to Gaia of the godless Greens. The Greens Party, Labor and the Teals are not alone in their sacrifice. The coalition, unfortunately, are drinking climate Kool-Aid too. New leader Peter Dutton has promised to take an even more ambitious emissions target to the next election, and I suspect that they'll eventually just adopt Labor's legislated 43% by 2030 target. They're already onto the net zero by 2050. This is why I think the carbon battle is all but over. The challenge now is how we can possibly influence such a foolhardy policy with a minimum of economic pain. Remember this, thanks to the belligerence of China, we've actually got to rebuild our manufacturing capacity in this country. That's going to require plenty of power. And unless we want to slip back into third world status, we've got to keep the lights on and affordable for our own citizens in our houses too. And in other countries, well, the agricultural sector has become a target for carbon abatement. That approach would cost us billions. So there are no easy options to deliver what the politicians have signed us up to. Thanks to a sustained campaign of hysteria and fear, we've made a rod for our own backs. Only the consequences of prolonged economic hardship can ever hope to right this wrong.